Well, lots of fun things going on with Easter, and so make sure you're paying attention to communication by way of email, announcements during the service, other services like this. But for me, I just want to let you know, though these things seem like, what's the point? This is one of the easiest things for you to do that can have the largest amount of impact. This past Tuesday morning, I took an invite card, and Tim and I had a meeting at a cafe across the street, and as we ordered a couple of coffee, she handed us our cups of coffee. I handed her one of these and said, we'd love for you to be with us at Easter in a few weeks. And she said, are you guys starting a church or do you have one already? I was like, well, we have one already. Come any Sunday, but I would love for you to come on Easter. And she said, well, I have a 7-year-old son. And so I said, well, great. We have kids programming at all 3 of our special service times on Easter. Love for you to bring him. And she's like, well, what do I need to wear? I was like, well, I'm sure people wish I dressed up more, but I'm kind of dressed like this every day, and including Sundays. And so then Tim and I, we just have our typical kind of front of the week meeting. And as we're leaving, we go to tell her bye. And as we tell her bye, she says, hey, I just want you to know, not only is my son coming, but one of my coworkers in the last 30 minutes has also agreed to come with me. The reason I tell you that is this. You're interacting with people every single day, okay? And you're like, but Ben, they don't know I go to church. They will now. They will now. Crazy. You don't have to even tell them you agree with everything we say. Just let them know. If, in whatever reason they come, if they have a guilty conscience, awesome. If they go to church once a year, let this be it. Friends, just so you know, if you don't know what the stats are at churches around our entire country, more people come to church on Easter Sunday than any other Sunday of the year. And if you don't leverage that opportunity and you're part of this faith community, shame on you. Like, whoa. If you're part of this community, if you won't invite someone on Easter, my guess is you probably haven't and won't ever invite someone. Like, wow, I'm serious. What we are seeing God do in this church, wouldn't you want to see it happen for your neighbor? What we are seeing God do in our church right now, those of you who are part of it and are sensing what God's up to, and you're seeing the changed lives and the stories being told through baptism and in your small group, and you're seeing crowds in here where now we're just counting the empty seats every Sunday because there's more people than there's ever been coming to our church. If you're seeing God do something, wouldn't you want your friends to be a part of it? And if not, why? Why not? Well, we are continuing the Rejecting Status Quo series this morning, and you guys know how it works. You have a favorite project you work on, and then another one comes along, and it's just not your favorite. All right, and you would think, as a pastor, my answer should be, well, all of my series are my favorite, God. This has been my favorite series I've ever taught in my 12 years or so of teaching. And for those of you that are ready for it to be over, shame on you, but I mean, kidding. I'm just loving what God's doing, but we will be putting the series to bed next week, and I love what God's doing in the stories, and what we've been saying throughout this series is that we believe God is able, we believe God can do all things, He can overcome impossible odds. We've been saying that, and from there we've been saying, so let's realize God has handed each of us gifts in this room, and we should use it, and we've adopted this let's go for it mentality, right? And some of us might think that if we reject the status quo and if we move in the direction of faith and exhibit faith, that God kind of has made a deal with us that He will do exactly what we want Him to, when we want Him to, and how we want Him to. Here's our opening question for today. Should we reject the status quo and exhibit faith even if we don't get what we want? Here's our opening question. Should we reject the status quo and exhibit faith even when we don't get what we want? If I ask the question this way, should we exhibit faith when we get what we want? The answer on that is yes. Those people that have no religion, the answer for them is yes. I'll have faith if I get what I want. But the question out of our story today is, should we reject the status quo and exhibit faith even when we don't get what we want? It's a two-part story for today. We'll finish part 2 next week, and really I think it will lead us into Easter, which will be the week afterwards. And our setting for today is 605 BC. in Babylon. It's 605 BC. King Nebuchadnezzar has just risen to the top of the kingdom in Babylon. He has besieged Jerusalem, and then what he does is he takes some of those Jews that have been captured, and he brings some of the brightest young people back to Babylon with him, okay? And what his plan is, he's going to bring them back. He's going to instruct them in the language and in the literature of the Chaldeans, where he's from, and then he's going to try to teach them how to get smart. But he only takes the brightest youth. Anybody ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers? Anybody? That's kind of this idea. It's a great business book, great leadership book, but it's kind of this idea. You start with the best people, you give them experiences. It's not fair necessarily. You start with the best, you give them better experiences, and then they become the top leaders. And so what Nebuchadnezzar does is he takes these youth, he's going to instruct them for 3 years. Don't you wish your degree had been accomplished in 3 years? 3 years, some of you took the 8-year plan, and that's cool. He's going to take them 3 years, and after 3 years, all these young people will be brought before the king, and he will decide who has advanced in wisdom and in learning and in leadership and business acumen, things like that, and he will put those people in charge of what's going on in Babylon. So that's the plan. We're introduced in chapter 1 of Daniel to 4 of these youth. Daniel, obviously, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay? And what's going to happen? They're going to be brought in with all the other youth, and they're going to get this 3 years of education. They will eat of the king's food. They will drink of the king's wine. And after 3 years, if they've really advanced themselves, they will be some of the king's most notable officials, perhaps even part of his cabinet. And so that's what's going on. Now, they're offered the king's food and the king's drink, and scholars aren't really sure why this is. The obvious reason is it was against their religion, and that's a little piece of it, I think. But they decide that no matter what the king offers them, there's certain things they won't eat. I want you to see it just on the screen here, and then we'll get into the Bible text in a second. Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. So this is not just true for Daniel, but for his friends, the 3 we just mentioned. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Verse 9. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. So in a moment, the crux of our story is going to show up in Daniel chapter 3. That's the big part of our morning, okay? But before we get there, I need you to understand this. Long before the moment of temptation or weakness came for Daniel and his friends, they had resolved that they would not give in. I don't have this on the screen for you, but this is the truth that emerged for me even on my BART route this morning. Here it is. Front-end resolve determines back-end moments of decisions and limits our regrets. Email me if you don't get that this morning. Front-end resolve on the front end determines back-end moments of decisions, and it limits our regrets. And you know this is true. Now, some of you are like, Ben, I like to live in the spur of the moment. Listen, there is nobody as spontaneous as your pastor. Okay? I'm the guy that when Shauna and I were newly married and she was like, we'd be in our pajamas getting ready for bed, she thought it was crazy because I was like, I think Krispy Kreme is still open. All right? I have a lot of spontaneity. I love when my staff thinks we're going to do one thing and I'm like, let's call an audible and go do this other thing. But when it comes to this, when it comes to your faith, when it comes to your non-negotiables, when it comes to your resolve, understand this, front-end resolve determines back-end moments of decisions and it limits our regrets. Don't wait till the moment. The reason I want you to see this first before we get to the big idea of the story is so you know they don't just decide on the moment when they have this huge thing to overcome and this great moment of temptation. You know this, and I know this. We have a list of regrets a mile long because we didn't resolve on the front end, and so we gave way and we gave in when the moment came, right? And then you go on in chapter 1, look at verse 17 of chapter 1. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Key phrase, God gave them. God gave them. Look at verse 20, what else God gave them? And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, the king found these 4 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. It doesn't say the king found them 10 times smarter than the average Joe. It says because of what God did for them, Because of how God multiplied their giftedness, they were 10 times wiser than the wisest people the king had access to. When you give what you have back to God, it's amazing how he can multiply it. It's incredible how you can get a job that you aren't qualified for. It's amazing, I should know, that how you can get a wife that you aren't qualified for. Amen. Come on. And all the other men are feeling guilty all of a sudden. Come on, guys, you got one more chance. Isn't that right, men who are married? Wow. Discount on marital counseling this week only. But it's true that when we give back to God what he's given us, it's amazing how God can multiply what we give him. You know the story of the fish and the loaves? Jesus feeding the 5,000? A little bit of multiplication, right? Right? A little bit of multiplication. Now, I want you to remember these 3 questions that we ended our time with last week. Now, some of you aren't here, and the rest of you have slept since then, but let me give you these 3 questions again. They're great questions. If you don't ask them daily, I encourage you to ask them weekly. Here they are. What have you been given? What's the point of it? And what will you do with it? What have you been given? What's the purpose or point of it? And what will you do with it? Did you hear what it said in 17? God gave them wisdom. God made them 10 times smarter than the magicians and enchanters of the day. God gave them. And hear this. God gives to us so that we might honor him with what we've been given. God gives to us so that we might honor him with what we've been given. Now, some of you might say, Ben, I don't believe that. I think God gives to us because he's a good God. True, but incomplete. True, he is a good, and he is gracious, and he's benevolent towards us. But when he gives us gifts, when he gives us wealth, when he gives us platforms, when he gives us relational influence, when he gives us a job, he wants us to honor him with what we've been given. Are you honoring God with what you've been given? When it comes to your money, if we were to observe how you give it and how you spend it and how you save it, would we go, yep, honoring God with your money? When it comes to your time, if we were to look at your calendar from this past week or this past month, or you were to look at mine, would we go, yep, honors God with this time? If we were to look at what your character, integrity looks like at the office, would we go, yep, in their job, that person honors God? If we looked at the platform, some of you have really big platforms in life right now. Some of you, yours are increasing. If we looked at how you leverage your platform, would we go, yep, that person's honoring God with the platform they've been given? It's a stewardship issue. It's a stewardship issue. The idea is God owner of all in our lives? And if so, do we steward what he's given us well? Now, typically when you hear the word stewardship in a setting like this, you begin to think money, and I think that's a fine place to start. How are you stewarding your money? How are you honoring God with your money? Or a better way to say it that makes some of us feel uncomfortable, how are you honoring God with his money? When it comes to your job, how are you honoring God with the job he's given you? You're like, Ben, I don't think he gave me this one. This is all that was left. We've all been in jobs like that before. But are you honoring him where you are? Please don't lie to yourself and tell yourself that you'll honor him when you get the job that you finally want. Are you honoring him? Are you honoring him with the influence that you have? With the gifts that he's given you? Are you honoring him with it? And so these guys decide right off the bat, they resolve, front end resolve, right? Determines back end moments of decisions, and it limits their regret. They resolve that they're going to honor God no matter what it costs them. No matter what it costs them. And so when chapter 3 begins, you have Nebuchadnezzar having a golden image made that's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. Okay? Now some of you, that's twice the size of your apartment when it comes to square footage, right? Like 810 square feet. I mean, that's a big space. That's how big it is. It's taller than this building. It's pretty wide. And so what happens is anytime, here's the edict, the decree, anytime that you hear any instrument, you'll see them listed in just a moment, anytime that they heard any instrument, they were to bow down to the golden image. Anytime. And they were all to bow down, and all of them did. It was the status quo thing to do in Babylon. Hear music, see the image, bow down. All of them did. Except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Everybody else did. And just so you know, sometimes we can't stick out when we make different decisions, but when the whole country's bowing down and we stand up, right? You're probably going to literally, physically, and figuratively stand out in a crowd, right? Well, the Chaldeans, the rest of those that are watching, and anybody, some of you, when you're praying with friends around the dinner table, some of you leave your eyes open. Well, that's kind of what the Chaldeans do. And then you're like, so-and-so was putting their fork in the potatoes. And the Chaldeans, obviously, some of them are looking around, right? They're supposed to be bowing down, but some of them are looking around because they begin to observe that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't bow. And now they're ready to tell Nebuchadnezzar. So if you guys would turn to Daniel chapter 3. If you need a Bible, raise your hand. We'll get one into your hands. Great joy for us to do that. This is a Bible you can keep. The rest of us will be in Daniel chapter 3, which is between the books of Ezekiel and Hosea. Daniel chapter 3. If you have one of those gift Bibles, we're on page 480. And would you all stand with me as we read this together? So good to see you guys here. It's fun to be a part of what God's up to in our church right now. I hope that you'll lean in. Here we go, starting in verse 12 of chapter 3. Here's what the Chaldeans say to Nebuchadnezzar. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, I think Brad should add all of those to our band for next week, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. You may be seated. Nebuchadnezzar is going to give these boys one last chance. Hey guys, you're going to hear some instruments play in just a minute. And when you do, I'm going to give you one more chance. If when you hear them, if you'll bow down, well and good. We'll be buddies. You can stay alive. Life will be good. But if you don't join in with what everyone else is doing, if you don't maintain the status quo that's normal around here, if you don't, know this, I will throw you into the fiery furnace. And then check out his arrogance in verse 15. Look at Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance. If we could have 15 back on the screen. And then who is the God who's going to rescue you at that point? Who is the God? Once I do this, because Nebuchadnezzar thought what many people and organizations and political governments alive today think, that they have all authority, not just on earth or in their jurisdiction, but in everywhere. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar thinks. He's just saying with arrogance, and what God will be able to save you when I throw you in? When you're in the fire, what God will rescue you? What God will deliver you? He doesn't know what we discovered a couple of weeks ago, one of my favorite new verses, Proverbs 21:1, which says, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. The reason that's good news for us is because if you and I are going to attempt to do great things for God, we're going to need to lean into a God who has power over everything we face. All right? If you're going to get a job you're not qualified for, you need God to move some things, don't you? You don't need him just to kill the people that you're competing against, all right? But you need him to move some things in the people's hearts who are making the decision. If relationships, right? If you're like, God, I need her to be my wife, you need God to make you look, men, more attractive than you are. You do. And he's given him this one more chance, but he's going, like, who will rescue you? Look at what they say in verse 17. Look at their faith in the face of what could have been amazing fear. They just say, if this be so, like if you're going to do this to us, if you're going to throw us into the fire, if this be so, our God whom we serve is, give me that word. Able. Say it again. Able. Is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. The God whom we serve, he is able. I want to let you guys know, when you're doing something in life and you want to know, like, is God in this? Is he in the midst of it? Is he surfacing something? One of the ways that I'm able to tell is when he brings a lot of things together around a banner or a theme in life, okay? And I'm not the person that says, I heard the audible voice of God. Now, you need to hear it. But let me tell you how this worked, this theme, God is able. It shows up in our text this morning. The King's going to actually say it next week, which is crazy. Do not miss next week. At least get the podcast if you're out. God is able is the theme there. As we began our staff meeting this Tuesday, we just began really praying around Easter together. And the way it ended up happening was just we all just would say out loud, God is able to. And then our staff went around the circle just for several minutes, filling in the blank. It's a great way to pray. Just, God, I believe you're able to bring my friend. God, I believe you're able to double the number of families at Epic. God, I believe you're able to rescue people. God, I believe that you're able to turn atheists into Christians. God, I believe you're able to provide for our church, whatever. God is able. And what's cool, Brad was at the pharmacy this week, which meant he wasn't in the office. He was working in 60 hours at the hospital. And so I didn't even know we were going to sing the song that we sang earlier this morning. And so when we pray together on the rooftop next Thursday, we will be praying around this idea that God is able. Do you believe he's able? Like, I know it sounds good when we're at church and it's Sunday and we got our Bible out and our Sunday best on. Do you believe he's able to overcome all odds, to rescue, to reconcile, to restore, to get you the job, to intervene on your parents' health? Do you believe he's able? Like, they just said, we believe that our God is able. They're saying, if you want to know if there's like 2 points for this message, here's the first point. God is able. Do you believe it? But the second one, verse 18, they said, but if he doesn't, but if not, say that phrase with me, but if not, say it again, but if not. This is a hard phrase. This is a very difficult phrase to live with. Easy to say, difficult to live with. Why? Because what we want to do is reject the status quo, exhibit faith, and for the job to work out. We want to reject the status quo, exhibit faith, and have the relationship healed, right? This is a difficult phrase to live out, but if you and I can get to the place where we live out this phrase, God, I believe you're able, but if you don't, God, I believe you're able, but if you don't, I'm not going to cease to be faithful to you. And that's what these guys wanted Nebuchadnezzar to know. What about us? Will we be faithful to God regardless? Even if the marriage doesn't work out, can you be faithful to God? Even if you don't get the promotion, will you be faithful to God? Even if what God has for you involves a great deal of suffering, will you be faithful to God? Even if you have to pray for this thing for 10 years before God finally answers and delivers, will you be faithful to God? Even if we can never bear children, will you be faithful to God? Even if one day you can no longer afford to pay rent in this city and you have to move, will you be faithful to God? Even when God doesn't heal us of our diseases, will we still be faithful to God? Your pastor included knows these are not easy questions to answer, are they? Hypothetically, we can answer anything. In reality, when our mom dies of cancer, these questions get a little more difficult. When the relationship doesn't work out, when you don't know if the job is going to come through. But friends, if we can get to a place where we're willing to lean in and follow God, even when we don't get what we want, when we want, and how we want, the reason that'll be a good place for us is because we're able to make resolve on the front end going, God, I want to follow. God, I'm not just looking to make a deal with you that if you do, then I'll do, and then you do some more, and then I'll go for it. God, even if you don't do it how I want you to, when I want you to, the way that I want you to, God, I'm still going to follow. That's what these guys say here. They basically let Nebuchadnezzar know that their worship isn't for sale. Look at verse 18. You see what they say? Listen, even if God doesn't rescue us, We want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. They're telling Nebuchadnezzar that, you know what? Our worship isn't for sale. Our faith isn't for sale. Let me ask you guys this. What are the things in your life that aren't for sale? What are the things in your life that aren't for sale? Is your integrity for sale? Could you be offered a job, and especially in a desperate unemployment time for yourself, could you be offered a job that would cause you to forsake your integrity? Is there a salary number somewhere way up there? I realize you'd only do it if it was this much. I realize it. But is there a salary number way up there that if that were offered to you, then you would set your integrity aside and go for it? Is your purity for sale? Could there be a man so handsome or a woman so beautiful that you would forsake your relational commitments? Is your purity for sale? Is your faith for sale? Could it get so bad that you would just go, you know what, I'm done with this? I know that it could. But I'm asking you for your resolve. Like, am I at that place? Is my faith for sale? Like, if the doors of the church shut down 12 months from now, do I forsake my faith? If this adoption in India, though, it looks like it's going to go well, there's a little bit of a holdup right now. If it doesn't work out, is my faith for sale? When my mom died of cancer 10 years ago, was it easy? No. Did I ask questions? Yes. Did I have doubts? Absolutely. But it's really in these moments that we need to lean in greater than any other moment, right? Listen, don't run from God at the moment that you need Him most. That's what most of us do, right? Like, oh, you're not going to do this my way? I'm out of here. Whoa, wait. Wait. If it's not working to your advantage, you might want to lean in a little closer. Before we started this church, long before we started this church, Shauna and I, we just got just a regular sheet of scratch notebook paper. We made 2 columns. On the left-hand side, I remember this very vividly, long before we ever moved or even were fully committed. We made a 2-column list, and on the left side, it was this: what are the things we're willing to give up and sacrifice to start this church? A lot of things on that list. Maybe never owning a home again, being a couple thousand miles from family, a lot of things on that list. But on the other side, we said, what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that we will not give up, no matter what it means for growth for the church, recognition for ourselves, whatever it means? What are the things we will not give up? And there were things on that list like a strong marriage, that even though it was going to take a lot of effort to get the thing off the ground, I wasn't going to forsake my marriage, and I wasn't going to forsake, and she wasn't going to forsake our roles as parents. And I can humbly tell you today, though there's a lot of life left here, I realize that I can humbly tell you today that the things that we made a list of things we would not compromise, we would not negotiate on, we would not sacrifice or sell out. We haven't. Keep praying for us. As God gives us more influence here at Epic, you know the things are going to get more difficult for us. But we wanted to have front-end resolve, right? Not when we got to the situation. Not when the temptation showed up. Not when the weakness occurred. We want to have this front-end resolve because the front-end resolve determines back-end moments of decision, and it limits our regrets. What have you sold out on that you need to reclaim? What have you given away and compromised? And the beauty of this is that the grace of Jesus that brought you in the first time is the same grace that will sustain you and restore you this time. What did you sell out on? And here's the big deal with rejecting status quo. When I give you messages like I have the last few weeks, most of us have the kind of personality that we're like, yeah, Esther, let's go for it, right? For such a time as this. Or Nehemiah, we're moved deeply, we're going to go for it. But one of the things this message this morning brings up out of their lives is that perhaps the most difficult part of rejecting the status quo is that it means that you and I have to live lives that look different than the people living around us. Let me say it again. We're gung-ho for some of the status quo stuff, right? But what it means ultimately for our daily interaction in life is that you and I must live differently. For those of us who claim to follow Jesus, and I realize there's people in this room who don't, so glad that you're here. For those of us who say we're going to follow Jesus, it has to mean that our lives, that we'll view money differently than the pervasive culture does, that we'll view our gifts differently than culture does. We'll do relationships differently than our culture. That we'll think about the dichotomy between humility and pride differently than our pervasive culture does. And some of us, this is most difficult for us. But here's the deal. when we invite people to church or we tell them we're Christian or whatever, one of the big things for them is that they're just not moved by anything they see in our lives. Like, why would I want to get up early on a Sunday if that's what this is? My life is actually better than yours. I've got more integrity than you do, and you're the Christian. I've been married longer than you have, and you're the Christian. I'm more charitable with my giving than you are, and you're the Christian. Friends, it should not be that way. I'm not advocating perfectionism here. You know that. We are a grace church. We believe in God's grace. We know ourselves too well to know we're imperfect. But at the end of the day, if we're going to reject status quo, something has to be different. I'm not talking about you being that awkward Christian at the office, please. All right? I'm not looking for pamphlets in Old English. I'm not wanting you to be megaphone girl. All right? That's not, please, tell them you're part of a different church if that's your route. Do I mean that? Yes. Wholeheartedly. But if we really want people to see this great God we claim has transformed our lives, then something has to show. Right? Something has to. New Christian, old Christian. Something has to show. One of the things, I can honestly say this because she's not in the room and she would be fine with me saying it, but one of the things that blows my mind about the way that my wife lives is that there's no doubt, and she does so well with the tension of letting people know about her faith, but doing it in the right kind of way. I'm telling you, I mean, just the way she lives, interacts in our school, in our neighborhood, I'm just like, wow, I'm so glad I get associated with you because people are going to think I'm awesome also. And really, I just show up. We were writing invitations yesterday for the neighborhood Easter egg hunt. She's got all the moms at school asking, why do you parent like this? How do your kids obey? And, well, it's because we beat them at home if they... No. I'm joking. But what I see from her is that it's giving her an opportunity. It'll give you an opportunity too. It'll give you an opportunity also. Would you guys stand with me? The band's going to come back up. And I just want to spend a little bit of time praying for you. Around these two ideas from this morning. If you guys go ahead and drop the lights for us. No one's really looking around. This is just for you to have some reflection time. Do you believe God is able? Some of you got news this week that you didn't enjoy getting, and it's caused you to kind of come in this morning even with this defeatist mentality. Do you believe God is able to overcome? Some of you have something on your calendar coming this week, and you already feel like it's not going to go how you need it to go. Would you believe this morning that God is able? That's one. And then some of us want to stop there, but we can't. Two is, you believe God's able, but even if he doesn't, will you still follow? So I want to just give some silence here, and then I want to pray for us. Just give you about 30 seconds, just in your heart to say, God, I believe you're able to, and then fill in the blank, even if you have a little bit of faith this morning. Just to spend some time in silence, just praying, God, I believe you're able to, fill in the blank. What do you need to trust that he can do? God, I believe you're able to forgive. I believe you're able to provide. What do you need to tell him? And then would you have enough courage to say to him as you finish that prayer, to say to him, God, I want to have the faith. I know you're able, but God, even if you don't do what I want when I want it, I'll follow anyway. I'll live under the banner that you're able, but I'm also going to live under the banner that I will be faithful regardless. God, I pray that you would be seen as mighty and God able. God, able to start a church from scratch, able to bring a girl home from India, able to give us a job that we got rejected from this week. God, able to provide the funding that we don't have as of this moment. God, able to heal our disease and our relationships. But God, even if you don't, I'm still going to trust that you're good. And God, I'm still going to follow. Brad and the band will lead us in a song. If you need quiet reflections, you can stand where you are peacefully. You can sit down. If you feel like you want to sing these words as we ask God to draw near to us. Let's believe that he's able. And let's make this deep commitment that we'll follow.